Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining our afternoon session. Again, I'm Ippolita Barnato, and together with Marta Perez de Albeniz, we're going to act as facilitator during this debate, which will involve Rozana Montiel from Mexico City and Kerstin Thompson from Melbourne. Thank you very much, both of you, and for your really inspiring presentations that can be used as a starting point for our debate about community. So we saw that your practices engage with a wide range of skills and programs. Across all of your work and in your statements, you have stressed the necessity to intervene on the experience of the everyday by rendering the ordinary extraordinary. So why is the attention to the everyday and the ordinary needed, according to you? And do you think that the architectural culture or debate is at fault on this?
So congratulations, Kerstin. I really like your presentation and your work. I was not very familiar with it, and we really have a lot in common. So talking about this, how can this ordinary become extraordinary? And also like the everyday, it's like how we look at things, how we observe, how we have this active gaze, as I call it. And this active gaze has the capacity to transform reality, just as the way that we look at things. So I think that we share these ideas also, no? And there is an absence, for example, in Mexico of public space, and obviously the lack of gathering spaces. So the best way to create is to transform space into place. Space is more abstract. Place is where you build relationships. And so, as I was saying, we need to observe habits, behaviors, surroundings, have this active gaze to look at these minimum details that maybe they can pass to many people, but if we really observe them, then this is the everyday urbanism, and this is the way that we can change things. And I think that architecture is not anymore the protagonist, but it's there for something else to happen. It's becoming an infrastructure for events, for public events. So architecture is the frame for connections to happen. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think what's really interesting is seeing how different speakers from different places and different contexts describe the ordinary, because clearly what we think is ordinary is very different to what, Rozana, you are talking about as ordinary. And even just in things like the sort of material uses, that just vary so dramatically across the different projects we've seen from different places. So I find that very interesting, that there's already this inevitable thumbprinted place which is playing out across projects without sort of consciously presenting it that way. So it's very interesting. I think too, there is, we often sort of laugh when people say, oh, you get good projects, you were fortunate to get that project to make this thing and we often think, well, it doesn't matter what you would be given, there is always the capacity to extract some kind of sense of community or opportunity out of that, and that's what we are always on the lookout for too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kerstin. I would like to comment, focusing on the community topic, that you both place emphasis on how people use and perceive the spaces or places, as you just said, Rozana, you design. What are the main issues you consider important in determining users' perception? And what do you focus attention on?
So, well, I think I pay a lot of emphasis in time. That's why I talk about temporality. And this time, it's a social time that relates with simultaneous narratives of the space and then becoming a place, and also around the clock activities, multifunctional spaces that allow different appropriations. I think that it's important that, for example, we talk about play, but it's not only play for children, it's play for everyone, for all the segments of the population. So that how can our projects include a wider segment of the population, ranging in age and in whatever. And so it's more, again, thinking about a public event. So we also, with the side actions we do that I talk about, that are very, very simple, just a chalk tracing something, it changed the perception of people of their own space. So they engage and they start seeing what they can have after. So this is why side actions for us are very, very important, because they're very low cost, ludic, and they involve people and change perception of them.
That's really interesting, those actions or involvements with community in the making of space. I think we're always interested in accepting that architecture is just one part of it, and not to be overly prescriptive with what might be the possible use of a space. And I'm always delighted when places are used in quite different ways to how we might anticipate. It's like the best thing that can happen, actually, and that's where I like architects' failure to prescribe as a very as a fantastic freedom that people bring to the space that they're delivered. So it's that faith in humans to find occupations that we don't always anticipate is a real joy.
And I love that, Kerstin, because I was talking with a friend for another lecture, and we were calling our lecture happenstance. And before I didn't know that word, and it has a lot of meaning, you know, like by chance. And I think that architecture should be like that. It's happenstance. Something occurs in a different way, that it's unexpected. It's serendipity. And I think that when that happens, it's really amazing to see how the spaces react to what it was already planned. So taking a little out of control of everything. Absolutely. I think that we as our architects are really like, okay, so this has to be used like this. This is the program. This is how we expect. And when the unexpected happens, it's amazing.
Yes, you definitely have to relinquish control on so many levels in the production of buildings too.
Yes, exactly.
It's really like a failed endeavour, that one. I know sometimes with our housing clients, they might ring me up months after or years after a building's finished and say, what do you think about me putting this or that or using it like this? And I just say, you know what, I don't care. It's up to you. It's your place. It's your life. It's for you to live. And architecture can't do the heavy lifting with life. It can support it, but it's not the means by which life is. So, yeah.
A word that you have mentioned that seems to pull your practices together is program. Kerstin, you have stated that every site has a larger responsibility. And you, Rozana, in one of the statements of your manifesto, say that approach a landscape as a program. You refer to program as something further designable with agency and with potential. So how do you expand your program, and how do you communicate and negotiate this expansion?
I thought it was really interesting when you talked about landscape as program. Did you say that you used? Yeah, it was really interesting. And it also made me think back to what Hannah mentioned in describing country, as opposed to, I think, another term which was used, which is countryside. And something of great interest to us, and certainly is playing out on the Bundanon project with the bridge, is how if we move from thinking about landscape in a picturesque understanding or as a sort of visual scenario to more performative and a way in which culture is embedded, it's a very big shift. So I was really interested in what you mean too by landscape as program. And in that sense, it is active, not just something to be looked at for its aesthetic qualities.
Totally, totally. And for example, there are many examples, but also like even the Fresnillo playground, as we find that it had already slopes, and it was an underused, abandoned space that nobody used it, and it was really dangerous, really, really dangerous. And suddenly there was a kid trying to slide in a rain gutter, and he couldn't, obviously. And then we said, well, we had slopes, we need public space, why don't we convert it in a playground with slides and stairs? So it's just about, again, observing what is there and then resignifying these elements, but already the program was in the landscape. And I also think that the capacity to integrate architecture as ecological infrastructure, but in understanding ecological as the logic, like subverting the logic of architecture as something that shelters you from the elements. So we create architecture that coexists instead of trying to impose shape to the landscape. We shape architecture according to the forces. And I think that it may seem obvious, but it's not. Like, for example, in Mexico, we have been dealing with water since we were conquered by the Spaniards, taking out the water of the lake. And you know, like we say, we don't have water and it rains 6 months of the year. And the water goes into the sewage. So we have taken out the natural things instead of coexisting and understanding them. And this is still happening. And I cannot believe it's like centuries after, we're still in this paradigm. How do we shift this paradigm?
Yeah, I think you touched on that before too, and it sort of reminded me of an interest we have in points of resistance. I think you said something about staying flexible and adaptable, but still sticking to principles. Yeah, which is very close to a thought that guides a lot of our work too. But just on this thing, I think there is this thing of resisting, and sometimes using buildings to resist the situation, which will always be fraught to do so. And as you were talking about with earthquakes or with volcanoes, similarly here it's floods and fire. And certainly with the bridge project, it was just so much about accepting that this is this torrential downpour place, so much overland flow. This is a possibility of not just working with that ecology, but using that as a way to celebrate and amplify one's understanding of place and experience of place through that. So it goes to this thing of not resisting, it's work with those forces.
Totally, and seeing the bridge project is beautiful, no? And how can you really resignify this idea and make something out of it in a beautiful way? And that it becomes more interesting and more expressive, and yeah, it has a lot of potential.
Well, there are a lot of topics that you have in common.
Yes,
really
yes, really, it's amazing. It's amazing. It's really nice. Yeah.
So you've been
good pairing. Yeah, whoever did the pairing is very good.
Yes.
It's like doing a dinner party. Who's going to cook?
Too bad we're not there with you.
Yeah, we should. So you both talked a lot about public space and communal space. So if we say that the success of communal structures as community infrastructure is defined by continuity and density of use, how do you assure long-lasting functionality to these structures? How do you ensure robustness to what you design? Is it through precision, tolerance, selection of material, systems?
All of the above. I think it's really interesting, and I was sort of even noticing tonight, well, for me it's tonight, how much of our work, when I just see it en masse, is different sort of material sensibility, if you like. I think brick here we default to very often because we don't have that earthquake issue so much. That interesting thing, brick seen as not just materially enduring, but there is a very strong symbolic meaning around brick as taking place, if you like. And also maybe because so much of our work, a lot of it is for government, they have very strict schedules around maintenance and durability. It's very difficult to use, for instance, timber externally here because it will weather and it'll deteriorate and they don't want to do maintenance. So we have probably been working in that world for too long, but it is why we often default to brick, and also because we have a very big brick heritage and it's a way of engaging with place and the familiar for community.
And Rozana?
So we try to work with local materials that have low maintenance, many times also, and usually work with a limited amount of materials for each project and try to experiment. For example, the Boy Temple, it's concrete, it's white concrete. How do we experiment with that? Or stone, or again concrete, but the incinerating station, folding concrete and trying to learn and experiment with the material and trying to bring the most out of it. But I also, for me, it's important as for the continuity and density of uses. For me, it's important that the users appropriate and feel and take ownership of the spaces we design. So that gives continuity and density once you appropriate, and because then you maintain the space and you take care of it, and if it feels it is your project also, then you use it in a different way. And what we have been trying to do is work with the community, not only for it, and that's the way how we engage them. They feel trust, and then that's how they take care of the projects.
And partly in relation with all this you have said, how important is preparatory study and research in the work of the practice?
Very. I think it's evident, certainly, from your presentation, just clearly how much teaching and research that goes into your practice. And I think too, we probably both share a commitment to teaching, and having been educated in Melbourne and through the school I went through, RMIT, there was always a very strong connection between the work as a student and professional practice. And our design teachers tended to be local architects. There was always a very clear link and not a kind of boundary between industry and academy. And I think that was important because it said to us that it is the ordinary project, it's the everyday project where good thinking can happen. You don't need to wait for special things for a level of intelligence and research and clarity of purpose playing out in projects. So I think that's, and for me, continuing to teach is a very important part of practice, and vice versa. You take the kind of messiness of practice to teaching around ideas of contingency and dynamism of parameters, and then hopefully take something of the clarity that comes out from research and teaching back to practice. So they're sort of mutually helpful.
Totally. It happens the same for me. Research is everything. It's part of the process. It's part of how we start doing a project every time. Even if we have very little time, research, we start with research. And I think this leads us to the idea of critical thinking and then acting. And so it goes one way to the other. So in the office, we always are looking for grants and for different things that can pay this research to do it in parallel of our projects, because I think that they really are connected one to the other all the time. And I think that this is the part that really helps us reflect about what we're doing. And this gives us the time to create a manifesto, to just think about what we're doing and how can we translate it into words and try to explain it. And this is also the relation with teaching. It's a moment for, all these experiments and all these ideas to put in practice while you're teaching, and you're learning also from the students. It's on the way around. And I think that today, every day, it's more important to really take the time to think about what we're gonna do and what we are gonna leave as architects there, no? And I really like the idea of reusing and recycling as repurposing. There's so many things that we can recycle, reuse, readapt, and take the ordinary and do it extraordinary, make the invisible visible, and make things happen as a happenstance.
Santi, can I insert myself in this conversation for a moment, if you can hear me?
Yes, of course.
Just from the comments you just made, do you assign any value to cleanliness in your spaces? And given that you come from two different places, which have different histories, what is the importance that you assign to ruins in the community? Or do they have a place in your world?
Did you say cleanliness?
Cleanliness. How clean the buildings in your pictures are. Because somehow there is this slight dislocation between some of the things that you say and the purity of the architectural images, as per usual. And so that somehow seems to infer that the cleanliness becomes as well a further connotation of the work. Is that true?
I think that's a really interesting question. I don't know if it's a case of mess or cleanliness. I think the reason I showed those art studios, for instance, is just because they were a very obvious example of how what was a sort of pristine white stall has become and is in fact a place for mess and for, paint and, dirt, if you like. So that's definitely the intention. And I think there is this thing that always through occupation and just through time, yes, things become mess, and that's a positive. I don't think that's a negative. And somehow degrade has been that question of cleanliness. I think if I think of the toilets, which I showed, and yes, they look sort of very neat. Some days they're clean, some days not so clean. Either way, you would hope that they are still able to work without being perfectly clean or without the mess. I mean, the mess is what makes life, so.
I think that it depends. For example, the toilets, I wish they were clean. No? So we also did some, because, it depends on the program. We did also these highway toilets, and they're a mess. You never want to stop in the highway into, one of these toilets because they're terrible. And so we did this, and we want them to be clean in that sense. But I think this is a little out of the question, but because you want to be entering these spaces and be, but I think that the spaces should mess. I think that when you deliver this, it's in a way, and when users start appropriating them, then it starts being more messy and they start changing, and that's part of it. These open structures, for me, they really are places to be changed, to be intervened, to have to it's a place where things can happen in a different way, as I said it before. So I think that these are open structures that permit many, many things, and or allow many things. And I think about this idea of the ruins. I think that I'm in love with ruins. I think that the ruins of the past to be present and then become future, it's really, really interesting. I was doing an exercise about La Villa Mairea of Alvaralto, and I thought, how could this Villa Marea could become a ruin in the future by disappearing and just leaving some elements of it that will interconnect with the forest that it is in. So I think that the ruin can be transformed. It's not only something about the past, but how can it become something in the future that it's interesting for all of us as architects.
Having said that, sometimes we try to imagine what our buildings could be like as ruins. And especially, you know, you sort of see the beginnings of the ruin when you see, say, a brick building before it gets its roof on, and it's just these tough walls, and you can almost project what it's like. But just on that thing too of lived space, if you like, we, years ago, there was an exhibition on portraits and architecture. And what we did for that was we went back to about 8 of our projects and photographed them as we found them. And we told people not to clean up, not to tidy, just as they are or lived for that day, just to document that. And it was really, really interesting just seeing, and I think that's a very valuable way to understand your buildings.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we are running out of time. It was a really inspiring debate, so I thank you both for participating. Thank you for being up so early on one side and so late on the other side. And we look forward to welcoming here in person. Okay, yes. We do have an agreement already. Okay,
we also do.
You can't escape that promise.
You'll be pleased to know we're both vaccinated. So
okay, we'll wait until then. Then the move will start. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The three of us. Thank you.
Happy to meet.